y'all. Coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, manager at Raftellus and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode for you today. We're going to be talking about managing disruption. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. Engaging Local Government Leaders is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. And your membership helps support this podcast. So if you want to hear more great stories about the work going on at the local level and the things impacting our profession, please join ELGL today. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Michael Welker is the Director of Policy and Research Partnerships at the ncIMPACT initiative, which is an endeavor from the UNC School of Government to leverage data-driven insights and evidence-based strategies to support North Carolina communities. Prior to joining ncIMPACT in 2023, Michael worked in policy research for the North Carolina Office of the Governor, NC General Assembly, and NC Partnership for Children. And he's also been a consultant for universities, government agencies, and philanthropies. With that, Michael, welcome to GovLove. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, awesome. Well, one of our traditions on the podcast is to do a lightning round to get to know our guests a little bit. So my first question for you is, what's the first album that you bought?
So I don't know if this is the first one that I bought, but the first one I remember owning is Time Out by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, which makes me sound like a total dork, but my dad had a lot of jazz records when I was growing up. And so I remember it's probably my 6th or 7th birthday, or Christmas rather. He gave me a CD player and a copy of an all-time jazz album.
That's awesome. That's a great first one. Yeah, it's like mine was like In Sync or something. So that's
I got less cooler as I aged. So
yeah. All right. Then my next lighter question for you: what book are you currently reading?
I just started one called Imaginable by Jane McGonigal, who is a game designer and futurist, and works for a group called the Institute for the Future. And so basically the book is about how we can get better at imagining what the future might look like, and some tools for how we can act on that, which will probably be relevant to our conversation today.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, super aligned with this work. That's fascinating. All right, my next lightning question for you: cake or pie?
Pie, all day.
Just any kind, or?
I like a more like a lemon or a key lime, something with a little tanginess to it.
A little tart, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then my last lightning question for you: where do you go for inspiration?
This is a good one. So I have a 1-year-old, and since everything is new for him, I think anytime I go somewhere he hasn't been, or like he's having a new experience, I feel like that's always good inspiration for me, because it reminds me that there's wonder and awe all around us if we're looking for it. And of course, he's one, so he's always looking for it. But it's good grounding for me to think about what's cool or interesting in the world around me.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it's wonder, it's awe and new kind of everywhere too. It's not, you don't have to go very far. Yeah.
Trips to the grocery store have not been the same since he came along. So
yeah, my daughter is not quite 2. She's 1 and 10 months. And she, the other day, there was a boat on the river near our house, and it was moving, which was like, oh my God, that took all of our attention for a while. So
yeah, exactly. It doesn't take much for him. And so I'm trying to just stay on his wavelength of like, oh wow, this is something really new and interesting.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I know so we have you on to kind of talk about some of your work at ncIMPACT and a recent report that y'all released. But I usually like to ask this, and I forgot to include it in our question list that I sent you. But how did you kind of end up in this field and doing this kind of work? I'm always curious about folks' career paths, and I covered a little bit of it in your bio, but kind of how would you describe how you ended up where you are and doing this kind of work in North Carolina?
Yeah, it's a long story. I always tell people like the first decade out of college, I was really a chronic job hopper and just like kept looking for what I thought was going to be the thing that really provided me with a lot of fulfillment or satisfaction. And took me a while to find it, but I think that in trying a lot of different things, it ended up being good preparation for where I am now. So after I graduated from school, worked, I had a lot of interest in education policy, stuff around children and families. So worked for a couple management consulting companies that did work with colleges, universities, state government agencies. Did that for a while and then decided I wanted to do something a little more hands-on. So went back and got my MPA here at Carolina. The plan was to be a local government manager, but while I was in school, had opportunity to do a couple internships in state government, which I found to be a really interesting space. So
Hmm.
when I graduated, took a job doing policy research and government relations for a nonprofit that does early childhood work in North Carolina. Did that for a few years, hopped over to philanthropy for a hot minute, and then this job popped up with ncIMPACT, which I really enjoy because a lot of what we do is trying to look across sectors and think about how different stakeholders or types of organizations can contribute to solving some of the big problems that communities face. And so having now worked in a lot of those different spaces, it's, I think, a pretty fun place for me to be because you get to look at issues from a lot of different angles and think about how to bring different partners into the fold.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the research we'll talk about today is it's not just in one community. It's like kind of thinking more broadly, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, can you maybe talk more about kind of ncIMPACT and sort of the work that y'all do? I mean, I'm curious, kind of like how like what kind of is there more than obviously we're going to talk about kind of this recent report on managing disruption and change, but are there other kind of initiatives that are part of this? And then like what's kind of the focus areas, I guess?
Yeah, well, it is a small but mighty team, so we do a lot. So, just by way of background, we're housed at the UNC School of Government, and I know there are a lot of folks in the ELGL world who have come through Carolina, so it may be familiar to some in your audience. But for those who don't know it, School of Government is part of UNC Chapel Hill and is really a great resource for local governments in the state and beyond about a lot of research, legal expertise, kind of what you need to know to be an effective public service leader, especially in the local government context. And so ncIMPACT got started under the school umbrella back in 2017 or so. And really, our aim or mission is to zoom out from a lot of the day to day, more technical questions that local governments or community leaders are facing and think about the larger issues that are impacting our communities. So, over the years, we've done work on everything from uh, resilience for historic structures in the age of climate change to how do we respond to the opioid crisis at the local level to
Mm.
how do we improve educational attainment rates or post-secondary attainment. We're doing work around affordable housing right now. So really, we're kind of generalists. We just try to get good information out there about what these issues shaping communities look like. But then the really fun part of our work is doing some direct partnership with local governments and other community leaders in North Carolina and helping them solve those challenges or try to solve those challenges. So,
Yeah.
one of our big things is we have this model of community collaboration where we'll recruit a cohort of 10 to 15 communities who will go through a program and all of them want to take on mental health and suicide prevention or affordable
Cool.
housing. And so they'll
Yeah.
bring together local government, nonprofit, private sector partners, faith organizations, community organizations, all these other different types of stakeholders. And then we do a lot of coaching and facilitation with them to think about how do we collaborate and really align our activities across all of these different organizational or sectoral lines. And so that's the stuff that I think is coolest about our work is actually just getting to talk to all of these different types of audiences and community and give them the tools and information they need to take on the big challenges that are impacting them.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, because I mean, as you well know, and all our listeners do as well, some of the wicked problems that local government is facing, like you need a collaborative approach. It can't be solved alone, and so bringing folks to the table to work together on it makes total sense. So, I'm curious, coming out of like a cohort like that, is you're the local government partner, like do they have a new kind of policy directive and kind of approach, or like what's maybe kind of the end result of like going through a cohort with all these partners and on some big challenge like that?
So I think a lot of it depends on the issue
Mm-hmm.
that is the focus of the program. So it's looked a little bit different each time we've run one of these. So, for instance, we did one on mental health and suicide prevention about a year and a half ago. And over the year that we were working with communities in that program, a lot of it is kind of taking on stigma, just raising awareness, helping people understand what resources are out there to support mental health. But there were also some instances where maybe you have a local government that's going to set up a new partnership with a health organization in their community so that they can train emergency responders in mental health first aid or some other sort of protocol for people who might be experiencing a crisis.
Hmm.
So it's really a mix of activities, just trying to figure out what are the gaps or needs, how is it affecting different parts of the community, and then what can you do from whatever capability and capacities you have within your community to respond to those gaps.
Yeah.
And so it's always kind of a mix, but a lot of it is operating in the sort of policy context. Being at the School of Government, we think a lot about what are the tools that local governments in our communities have to solve some of these problems, but
Hmm.
um, no one sector can do anything alone. So maybe you need to rely on nonprofits or other community partners to help with outreach, engagement. Maybe you need private sector folks or philanthropists to be able to provide funding to support some of these initiatives. So we really just help them build kind of their strategic plan or action plan for how they want to take on each of these challenges based on the assets that are present in their communities.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, and what we wanted to talk about today is this new report that y'all released called "Managing Disruption in a Rapidly Changing World," and it sounded like this came out of kind of a growing practical solutions group that y'all have. So I
Mhm.
don't know if there's anything you want to share about that group and maybe its focus within kind of your ncIMPACT framework before we get into the kind of meat of the report. But yeah.
Sure. So I think, like a lot of things in the world today, some of this dates back to COVID
Mm,
era and kind of how communities were coming out of that time, and some of the lessons learned from just the disruption around the pandemic. So
mm,
a few years ago, one of the school's big funders, Civic Credit Union, basically they were looking at renewing their gift, and we were thinking about what did we want to do moving
mm,
forward as a school. And this idea of fostering innovation in response to disruption so that communities could see disruption more as an opportunity rather than something scary or something challenging or difficult, and see some of the possibilities there. That was really the impetus for all of this. And so over the past few years, we've been putting together some research and some ideas for programming and convened an advisory committee. And then we're also thinking about how we'll engage SOG faculty who are already doing research, again, on a lot of direct day-to-day issues affecting local governments, but strengthening their ability to put that in a larger context around some of the issues that are shaping our communities. So really, the overarching goal for GPSNC is fostering that culture of innovation across local governments. And we're experimenting with a lot of different tools and approaches to help foster that kind of future forward mindset in more places across the state.
yeah. Yeah. No, that's very cool, and we'll link to the work of the group and obviously this report in the show notes for this, so folks can kind of learn more. Um, I I'm curious, just starting at the beginning of approaching this kind of topic, like managing disruption and thinking about you're right. Treating it as an opportunity is really is like a shift in mindset. So like, how did you guys think about kind of approaching this topic, and again, like trying to make it practical for some folks in like North Carolina local government? So how did you guys at the beginning like think about like what are we going to do, and how are we going to kind of focus our research and our approach to this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think part of the challenge is that in some ways, we're trying to forecast the future
Yeah,
or look
yeah.
ahead to what are the things that are going to be impacting communities moving forward. But there's this quote that I like that says that the future is already here; it's just not evenly distributed.
Hmm.
And so, essentially, what that means is that some people are already seeing the effects of a big issue like housing affordability or like the aging of the population or increased concern around climate resilience, but it's arriving at a different time horizon. It's going to have different levels of impact depending on where your community is situated geographically, demographically, economically, socially, all of these other factors. And so what we wanted to do was provide kind of a high level overview of what are some of the big things that we know are out there. We may not have the exact what is this going to look like in 20 years, but
Mm.
give people enough information to be able to start a conversation. And so if you're a local government leader, whether in a staff position or as an elected, um, having this basis for conversation to say, you know, there's all this stuff out there now that we're hearing about um, water quality or environmental quality. So, are we thinking about how to incorporate this into decisions that we might make around how we're investing in our infrastructure or
Mm.
other services or resources that we're trying to provide in our community? And so the briefing book was kind of the product of that to basically look at a range of different types of issues, give
Mm-hmm.
people some really core information, just kind of as a quick way to get up to speed about what we think some of the big challenges are going to be. And then for people to be able to build on that in their own contexts and think about if this is coming for us and we think it's going to be a big impact for us, how are we going to respond to that?
Yeah, yeah. So to get to it, what are some of those big buckets of drivers of change that y'all identified? And again, we'll link to the report so folks can kind of read more about some of the stuff we'll talk about.
Sure. So bear with me. I'll go through all 16
Yeah.
that we identified. And I should say at the outset, I don't think this is a comprehensive list. And also, some of the issues change and evolve over time. So,
Mm-hmm.
one of the drivers is blockchain and cryptocurrency, which when we started writing this in late 2022 or early 2023, that was like a whole different conversation than what it looks like now, or something like
Yeah,
artificial
yeah.
intelligence. So with that caveat out of the way, we bucketed this into 4 categories: social, technological, economic, and environmental. Within social, we said aging, health, housing, and public safety. Technological, we said artificial intelligence, new transportation technology, digital access and equity, and smart communities. Economic, blockchain and cryptocurrency, circular economy, economic restructuring, and workforce and workplace disruption.
Mm-hmm.
And environmental, we said climate, energy, water, and food security. So again, that's not the full list. I've had lots of people suggest other things that we should have covered, and there are some things that are on the cutting room floor, so to speak. But we think that these are some of the big things that are coming up most frequently in local government, and hopefully this is a good grounding in some of those issues for anybody who checks out the briefing book.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, and each of those are such big topics. So
Great.
it's not like even if you're leaving stuff off, it's not like there's not plenty to dig to chew on.
Mhm.
So I don't know if there's one you want to kind of use as an example, but I'm curious. Like, I kind of I get the big buckets of social,
Mhm.
technological, economic, environmental. But when you think about some of the more specific things under those, like like housing or artificial intelligence, like how'd you guys think about, hey, how is this impacting local governments, and then like what are some of the things out there that we want to share that folks should be aware of? Like I'm curious on kind of the approach, and then maybe I don't know if you want to share some of what you found.
Yeah. So the book is basically designed to give really quick insights into each of these different issues. And before I go further, I should give credit to Ben Hitchings and David Rouse, who partnered with us to put all of this together and did some really thoughtful research in compiling all of this. But basically, we wanted this to be digestible. So each of these issues, we have 2 to 3 page write up of basically what are some of the high level stats or why this is a big trend, what are the key terms or definitions you need to know, and then thinking about those implications. How does this look different across communities? How certain is it, or how clear can we project some of the impacts? And then what I think is maybe most interesting and most significant is looking at how all of the issues might impact each other in ways that they're
Yeah.
interconnected.
Yeah.
So, to give you an example, one that a lot of people have latched onto when I've talked with folks about the briefing book is aging. I think communities everywhere, we know the baby boomer generation has reached retirement age. I think they're continuing to hit that 65 plus threshold for the next few years. Um, and so here in North Carolina, where we're working, the overall age 65 population is going to grow by about 50% in the next 2 decades. Most of those people are going to be in rural counties, just in terms of raw count, but we're having the highest rate of growth in urban counties. North Carolina also has a lot of tourism, retirement type communities, both in the mountains and on the coast. So there's, again, sort of an uneven distribution across types of communities.
Mm.
But bottom line, we know this is just a fact about the population. So it's certain for everyone that the population in North Carolina is getting older, and it's going to be something that has high impact. So when you think about what those impacts look like, we know in terms of intersections with other issues, it's going to have implications for housing, right? If people want to be aging in place, they're going to have to make sure that the housing stock is going to be safe and appropriate for folks who may have mobility needs as they're getting older. It's going to have to stay affordable for folks who are on fixed incomes. Um, there's going to be huge implications around health systems and kind of shifts in demand for healthcare services as folks are getting older. And then I think that when you look a little bit deeper below some of those things, it also has real implications for local governments in terms of budgets, for instance. So
Yeah.
if people are retiring, moving on to fixed incomes,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's going to be different in terms of their consumption patterns and what that means for the type of revenue sources that are coming into local government. Maybe you're less reliant on sales taxes in some communities, but maybe more reliant on sales taxes in others. There are all of these other decisions that you might need to make about types of services that you're providing as the population is aging and meeting some of their other needs. So, a big issue with the aging population is mental health and isolation. So,
Mm-hmm.
local governments are potentially in a position where if you invest more in parks and rec or social services or other ways to help foster community, you can also be addressing some of those challenges around social isolation. So this is just one issue. You can say aging is a thing that's going to impact our community, but really it's so interconnected with every other aspect of quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you're thinking about what that means for local government decision maker, as you're evaluating, budget or policy choices, you can have this lens of saying, if our community is going to be 50% more 65 plus in 20 years, what are the things we need to be investing in now to make
Mm.
sure that we'll be prepared then to address all of these different facets of what that change will look like for us?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah. And being aware and knowing that this is the trend, like it can change how you administer programs or the things that you're doing. We had Danielle Aragoni, who is the author of a book called climate resilience for an aging nation.
Mhm.
Hopefully I got all that right, but it's an old episode of the podcast, I think
Yeah.
from last year. But she talked about how, aging populations are more impacted by extreme weather events
Mhm.
and more. And so it changes if you know how big that population is going to be or is, it changes maybe how local government should be responding and planning. So like that's another example of maybe like, if you're aware of some of these trends, how you can kind of change some of the work that local governments, that's core to local governments.
Exactly.
Was there an issue that maybe, as you guys kind of explored it more, you're maybe surprised was as important as you found it to be, or as interconnected as you found it to be?
Um, the one that I feel like I end up talking a lot about is AI.
Mm,
And so to give you a sense of the timing, I think we started writing this at the end of 2022, early 2023. So it was within maybe a month or two of
mhm,
ChatGPT coming out and this whole transformation in how people were thinking about AI and applying it to their lives. And so you're going along, you're saying, here's what we know or speculate about AI as we're writing the report, but there's still so much that's changing or adapting just in real time between when we started writing it and when it ultimately got released middle end of last year. And so I think that that's one where we truly, I'm not a technologist. I
yeah.
don't know what the frontiers of AI look like, but it seems like as it's become more integrated in so many different aspects of our lives, for local governments, there's opportunity in it, but any kind of technological change management type process is also something that can be really fraught for those types of organizations as well.
Mm,
And so that's something that I probably, when we first started, I wasn't thinking as much about it, but now I spend a lot more time thinking about what does AI mean for how you might be able to, from everything from anticipating particular service needs or types of issues that might pop up using kind of predictive technology to how might you use chatbots or a service like that to help improve customer service interactions or response times to how can you use AI to help manage funding, reporting requirements, or grant applications, things like that.
mm,
And so there's a lot of possibility out there that I feel like is going to trickle into some of these other areas. And I feel like that's one of the areas where I'm least certain of what the ultimate impact is going to look like. But I feel pretty confident at this point that it is something that is going to show up in a lot of places and that a lot of communities are going to be figuring out in the years ahead.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean you're right. Yeah, that is interesting that you kick it off with the very beginning of ChatGPT, and now it's pretty interesting to see how powerful that
Mhm.
technology has become, and how potentially impactful it could be. So you're right. Yeah. Um, Are there examples of like, because as I was kind of flipping through the report, there are some kind of examples you share from local governments that are doing work on some of these topics and have maybe programs in place or things in place. I don't know if you want to, what order you want to go in, but I'd be curious to hear kind of some, because there's lots of good work going on in North Carolina that y'all highlight of like local governments working on these issues. So could you share maybe a couple of the examples of what local governments are doing and kind of how they're responding to some of these disruptions already?
Totally. And this was one of our goals with the report was thinking about, again, because we don't want disruption to feel like something that's scary or inaccessible, being able to point to what communities might already be doing was a real priority for us in putting this research together. So I think one of my favorite examples comes from the town of Wilson, North Carolina, which is it's about 50,000 people, so not huge in the grand scheme of things, but a decent sized community, especially for rural Eastern North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had been using fixed route buses for a while, and this is under the new transportation technology driver. But in the pandemic, I think they were sort of dealing with really high variance in demand for transit services and recognizing that there were all sorts of other considerations to how people were getting around sort of in the pandemic era. And so back in the fall of 2020, they started this new program called RIDE, which is just on-demand microtransit. So similar to an Uber or Lyft, but really heavily subsidized so that the cost for a rider in this community is going to be comparable to what they would have been paying for a bus ticket. So they partnered with a private vendor called Via, which is a microtransit company, to implement the system. And again, as with Uber or Lyft, you can get on an app, request a ride, and for the same cost as what it would have taken to get on the bus in North Carolina, or in this community in North Carolina, you're able to get a direct point-to-point ride. And so when you think about the second order benefits and kind of how this ties in to some of the other drivers of change that a community like Wilson might be experiencing, it means that people can more easily get to the grocery store, they can get to doctor's appointments. So it's going to impact food access and health. It's going to help older folks, that aging population, get around. It's going to help with workforce development because maybe folks who would have had to rely on the bus schedules to be able to access a degree program at the community college, now they're able to more easily get to class. And so by leaning into this new opportunity with technology and looking at microtransit rather than more traditional bus lines, you get better service quality for a lot of the residents. And then also it has all of these impacts that the community is able to see and realize that are beneficial in other ways beyond just what it means for someone to get point A to point B. So that's one great example. Another I'd point to is in Beaufort, North Carolina, which is a coastal community. It's one of the oldest places in North Carolina. I think it's the third or fourth oldest town in the state. And so they're down on the coast, have a lot of historic properties. And so they've been thinking a good deal in recent years about climate resilience. So the strategy or case that we highlighted in the report under the climate driver is Beaufort's creative resilience plan, or the resilient Beaufort plan. And essentially they've implemented a variety of different types of strategies to help mitigate climate risk in the community. So that might be bioretention cells to help filter stormwater while also adding some beautification on streets in their downtown district where people like to walk around, look at some of the historic structures, be down near the water, all that good stuff. They're looking at elevating historic structures to kind of mitigate flood risk there while also preserving a lot of those historic aspects of the community. And then they're also thinking about how to minimize some of the environmental impacts of growth in that community. So Carteret County, where Beaufort is located, has had a good number of people in the last couple decades move down, want to be closer to the beach. Maybe they're retiring down to the coast. But the community wants to minimize some of the environmental impact of new construction. And so they've done a good amount around adaptive reuse. So there's an example of a school that's been converted into condos. So you help minimize the environmental impacts from new construction in that way, while also being able to meet some of this growing need that you have as the population is increasing in the area. So I think that's another one that I like because it's another example of responding to one driver, but also in the process meeting a lot of other needs or adapting to the sort of context that you're experiencing that driver in within a particular place.
Yeah, those are both great examples of how interconnected some of these challenges are. Of like you think you're just doing transportation, but really it's helping little seniors live their lives. It's improving food access, like or access to grocery stores. Like so, it kind of steamrolls, I guess, or not. There's a flywheel effect. I don't know what
exactly. Yeah.
So I'm curious, one of the things that I know lots of states and lots of regions dealt with is, and parts of North Carolina have dealt with, in addition to to climate impacts, which our friends in North Carolina have our thoughts are with, but it's something like the economic, displacement, some of the like workforce stuff, some of the like Wilson's actually a good example of this, of like, hey, it used to be a huge tobacco town, not much of that industry there anymore. So I'm curious, some of these economic drivers, like what have you kind of seen as this kind of disruption of change, and who knows what is coming down the pike of this new regime and what economic changes they are doing. But I'm curious in kind of what you've seen in that space around, hey, this can be a big disruption, especially in, it can be really, geographically, I don't know, isolating and really like impact specific parts of a state, but then maybe not the state as a whole. And so just from your guys' vantage point at ncIMPACT, what's that kind of been like? And when you guys are thinking about some of those economic challenges that our communities face?
Yeah. So I think that the biggest thing overall, which is true in most places, is just a general trend from manufacturing more towards service sector
Yeah.
jobs. And I think especially in North Carolina, we've got a lot of growth in these kind of white collar professional fields around finance in the Charlotte area, or a lot around biotechnology and health sciences in the Triangle. And so I think it's another thing I would highlight is that a lot of these issues are felt beyond the boundaries of one specific community.
Yeah.
And so, if you are someone who lives in downtown Durham and you're going to work at Research Triangle Park, that's great. It's going to be a good, high paying job, but also downtown Durham is going to have issues around affordability. It's getting much more expensive. And so maybe when you think about where you want to live, you're looking further out and you're going to be in a neighboring, more rural county. But then if you make that decision, then there's also going to be trade offs with transportation and some other quality of life stuff as well. And so I think one thing I'd emphasize on that note is just that there's so much growth and opportunity in a lot of parts of the state. There are others that have lost jobs to
Yeah.
manufacturing, sort of going in decline. But we're all part of the same state, and it's all interconnected in other ways. And so I think that that's really another aspect of this, is thinking about how do we meet those shifting needs, different types of conditions in each community, while also recognizing that the boundaries between these communities are fluid and that people are
Yeah.
traveling from one place to another and experiencing different aspects of their lives or needing different things out of different places in the state as well. So it's something that I think is really a much larger regional, statewide, and even nationwide challenge to think about what some of those economic development and workforce needs look like to be able to continue on this growth trajectory, while also making sure that places that aren't experiencing as much of the growth are still able to enjoy high quality of life and benefit from some of the larger prosperity that we're seeing in the state.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, that's a great point. And well, and to your point about kind of a lot of these challenges don't stop at jurisdictional boundaries, right? So, I'm curious, as you guys are kind of thinking about examples or just things that you've seen, or maybe even discussions with the kind of advisory group as you guys were putting this together, like, are there like kind of some regional approaches or some collaborations that you see in North Carolina where like, hey, the Triangle might be a great example of like, hey, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill all need to be together on this because we're one market, whether we want to be or not. And so it seems like there's some opportunity, especially from your guys' seat, of like looking at the whole state, of saying, hey, this section of the state, or maybe even multiple sections of the state, are dealing with the same kind of issue. Like how can we kind of work together to come to a common solution? Or, and obviously some of the best practices you're sharing are to spread some of those around different parts of the state. But I'm curious about maybe if there's been any kind of regional collaboration or thought there.
Definitely. Well, I think especially, in pockets of the state that are more rural, inevitably there kind of has to be some pooling of resources or really creative solutions to meet what is often a lack of capacity or resources. But we also take a really strengths and assets based viewpoint that a lot of times people in those regions that are maybe less well-resourced are often most creative and most resilient because of those constraints. And so I think one example or strategy that we heard about recently is around crisis response in Western North Carolina. So um, we see in some urban locations these co-responder models, or sending out a social worker or hiring a social worker into public safety departments as
Mhm.
kind of a strategy to address things that are maybe more related to mental health or substance use. And for a lot of places in that part of the state, it's a little bit challenging, both to have the resources to bring on that position within that organization, but also if your ultimate goal is to be able to go out on a call and then refer someone to um, homelessness services, or get them to a food bank, or make sure that they're able to go see a doctor, or whatever other supports they might need. If you don't have that resource in your specific community, then you need to
Mhm.
find it somewhere else. And so we've heard for communities out in the western part of the state, which is much more rural and remote, who are looking at implementing this sort of model, that they're
Mhm.
thinking about how to map out some of those resources, so that if you're
Oh,
in
interesting.
one
Yeah.
community that doesn't have a food bank distribution site, maybe there's a way for you to refer someone to services in a neighboring jurisdiction, so that as you identify food as a need for that citizen, um, you may not be able to do it directly where you are, but then you find another neighboring jurisdiction. So a lot
Mhm.
of it is around collaboration, and being able to cooperate in those ways. And then I think that the other thing that comes to mind is just looking at the way that some of these larger metros can interact with the more rural communities around them. So
Mhm.
we have in the environmental section, one of the drivers we talk about utility regionalization. And so the examples from the town of Hickory, which is, or city of Hickory, which is a little bit larger place in the western part of the state,
Mhm.
figuring out how to do a regional consolidation of a wastewater stormwater system
Interesting. Yeah.
with a smaller community that's nearby, and help them achieve some of that same economy of scale, where you may not be able to sustain it yourself, but through partnership and alignment, you can find a path forward to make sure that you're able to get what your community needs, and then ideally try to find a sort of win-win scenario for the larger community that maybe has the capacity to offer.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So I'm curious, if I'm someone that works in a local government, or I'm a decision maker and
Mhm.
a leader in a city or town in North Carolina or beyond, and they pick up kind of this report and they start flipping through it, and they're like, oh my gosh, what what are maybe ways that you guys are envisioning that like folks would use this and maybe start to implement or think about kind of how do I take this challenge that is obviously maybe a future trend or that I'm already seeing in my community and think about kind of some of the solutions that you guys start to identify and how to you know make that work in their community. What does that kind of I guess implementation piece look like for someone that that is maybe new to an area or new to one of these
Mhm.
these areas of disruption?
Yeah. So we had this very question in mind as we were putting the report together. And so Ben and David, our co-authors, who are both experienced planners, they were thinking about really how we translate this and put it in some terms, or make it concrete for folks who work in local government to be able to actually go out and do something with this information. So within the report, we have a series of worksheets that basically are designed to help, no matter what your role in the organization is, everything from staff member all the way up to elected leadership, that you can take the information that's available in the report, use these worksheets to help identify what are the highest impact, highest certainty drivers for our communities, so that we can prioritize where we should be focusing,
Mm,
understand some of those intersections, because as we've talked a lot about today, there are so many interconnections between all of these, and a lot of that is dependent on your specific local context. And then once you have that, thinking about what might you already be doing or could better align with what you're already doing in terms of projects, services, things that are in your budget or your strategic plan that you already know is a priority or something that you've said you're going to do as a community. But now you can add this additional context to say, we're addressing a driver in this way. Maybe
Yeah.
we can build on this project or make a new investment in next year's budget to be able to actually um, more holistically address some of these challenges and be really strategic and intentional about how we're going to look a few years out. Because I think one thing that we kept saying as we were putting all of it together is it's really hard for people in local government a lot of times to look past the next council meeting, let alone next budget cycle, next strategic planning cycle, to something that could be 10, 15, 20 years down the line.
Yeah.
And so our goal with this is to be able to provide enough context to say, are we focusing on the right issues, or how can we focus on the right issues, but then map that back to some of these governing priorities and things that we're already hoping to do through our daily operations or what we funded in our most recent budget or capital improvement plan, or things that get down to that more nitty gritty level.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a great point. It could be another way of prioritization on like a CIP, even of like, hey, we have these 10 projects, and now if we're thinking about these challenges that are coming our way, maybe we rearrange which ones we do first, all else being equal. So yeah, that's a really good, and that's great. So we'll be sure to link to those resources that y'all have, so folks can check that out. And then, it looked like I'm curious, kind of what's next for y'all with this initiative. Are there kind of more resources coming? It sounded like this is kind of the first step in sort of this disruption work. So yeah, what else are you guys kind of working on in this space?
Yeah, it definitely is just the beginning. I think we wanted something that would be easy for people to latch on to, but always the first question is the one that you've asked. What does this mean? So what do I do with this? And so we have a few things that we're going to be rolling out in the next few months. So one, as I mentioned at the top, School of Government is a great resource for research and training on issues affecting local government professionals. And so the GPSNC team funded some faculty research projects that basically look beyond the drivers themselves and thinking about how this impacts particular aspects of the work. So I mentioned crisis response, but one of our projects is going to be around different models for crisis response in rural communities. We have another that'll be looking at workforce development needs intersecting with utilities, environmental type work, and thinking about how best we can help position communities to meet those needs. So as we hear more from our faculty researchers who are now engaged in this work and thinking about things in terms of the drivers of change, we'll have some more insights to share over the next few months. In terms of more accessible stuff, we're going to be launching a webinar series in the next couple months that is meant to highlight a lot of the drivers of change that we've already identified, and potentially some that emerge or that evolve. And our goal for the webinars is to feature both subject matter experts, so people from organizations like ours who do a lot more big picture, contextual, what's happening in the policy landscape, socially, economically, and be able to provide that level of insight on some of these issues, but also to continue to highlight local governments, communities that are doing really cool and interesting stuff in response to these challenges. Yeah. So each of the webinars, we're going to do these monthly. They'll feature both of those perspectives and try to put them in conversation with one another so that we can really help add that larger context to a lot of the day-to-day work of local government. And then one thing I'm really excited about that we're hoping to do at least a handful of next year is some regional innovation workshops. So
Cool.
for our folks in North Carolina, especially, encourage them to keep your eyes out for this. But the vision here is that we want communities to be able to learn from one another. And so it's not just us going out, hearing what people are doing, and then reporting it on our website or sharing it in spaces like these, but that we'll actually get a lot of people together in a room who have a shared interest around an issue like food security or the circular economy, and think about what are some of the strategies that each of us is using, what are some of the opportunities or barriers that we're encountering, and just really get them in conversation, thinking about how they pool their knowledge and creativity to be able to develop some really innovative responses. So we're hoping to host at least a few of those next year, and we'll be sharing more details about what those will look like in the very near future.
Awesome. Very cool. So our listeners can kind of follow along. And I think one of the values is, although you guys are focused on North Carolina, like these challenges are not unique to North Carolina.
Yeah.
Our listeners from across the country could learn from kind of what's going on and some of the research y'all have done. And I think the webinars and some of the local governments you're highlighting are great case studies for anybody in the country. So it's really, this is a very cool resource. So that's really great.
Totally. And yeah, people should not be discouraged if they open the briefing book and they're wondering why we keep talking about, Mecklenburg County or North Carolina law, whatever it is. A lot of these issues are really nationwide. They're much larger. And I'm biased thinking that North Carolina is, the best of the best. And we have some of the most creative and talented local government professionals out there. So hopefully others can learn from some of the examples and cases that we've highlighted, but also just get that grounding in what a lot of these big issues look like.
Yeah. Agreed. Well said. All right. So then I've got my hardest question for you. If you could be the GovLove DJ and pick out the song for exit music for this episode, what song would you pick?
Well, it's a very different direction than where we started with jazz from the 1950s. So I've been really into the new Jason Isbell album. He's a singer-songwriter and just put out an album called Foxes in the Snow a month or two ago. And the song I would recommend is called Ride to Roberts.
Oh, you're a man after my own heart. This is one of my most listened to songs right now. So well said.
Yeah, it's perfect because it's about, hanging out at a bar in the middle of summer. And right now, a couple months away from summer, that's the energy I want. So looking forward to playing that all summer long.
I love it. Perfect. Well, that ends our episode for today. Michael, thank you so much for coming on and talk with me and sharing kind of all the work and the research y'all are doing at ncIMPACT. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Yeah. And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders. And the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. You can reach us online at elgl.org/GovLove. And you can also give us a follow on our page on LinkedIn. Subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app. And if you're already subscribed, go tell a friend, a colleague about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. With that, thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.
Bachelorettes don't know where they are, and I don't say things that I don't mean. You're the best thing I've ever seen. You can have my money if you spend your own. Well, I'm still running, but I'm not alone.